I'm Vicki Petro. I'm the Deputy General Counsel for the Recording Industry Association of America. We represent the major record labels in the United States.
I'm Tanya Woods. I'm the General Counsel and the Head of Policy for the Entertainment Software Association of Canada. So we represent the video game industry, console makers, publishers, and such, and game devs.
And I'm Karen Thorland, and I am Deputy General Counsel and the Chief of our Global Content Protection Legal Department. So I oversee all our content protection litigation and assist with our efforts worldwide. So what we'd like to do today is try and give you a sense of what piracy looks like today, how it's maybe different a little bit for our industries, what some of the problems are that we're facing, and the tools that we have available to try and address those problems. And so if we have time, we can talk a little bit about the impact of piracy on our industry, as well as maybe some legislative or treaty issues, but I don't know if we'll get there. So, Victoria, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So one of the first things we wanted to let you all know, or make you aware of, is that all of our industries are either 100% digital or have dramatically shifted to digital in the last 10 years. The slide you've got up right now shows you the recording industry in the United States. At our peak, which was around 1998, 1999, we were at a $14 billion industry in the United States. In part with the technical revolution that's happened and online piracy, we are today about half of what we were. If you notice the different colors there, it is the shift in the form of sales that have gone on over time. So in 1998, we were 100% physical. It was mostly CDs. Today, we are 70% digital, with the majority of that coming from streaming. Oops, what did I hit? I hit the wrong button. Let's go back. And then do you want to say anything briefly about the entertainment industry? I'm sorry,
Sure.
the games?
Games, yeah. So games, we like to think, although I might have two people that would disagree maybe, that we are the fastest growing sector of the games, of the entertainment industry globally. We're big. We're going to hit about $100 billion valuation globally. If we haven't already, it's coming. We were born digital, so that makes us a little bit different. From the others, we've had less bumps along the road. We only have one kind of focus on our enforcement activity, which we'll talk about in a minute. But do you want to just go clicking one more? Yeah. So this is just a picture of Canada. So you get an idea. So we contribute in Canada about $3 billion to the economy. We're the third largest based on that kind of measurement. The US is obviously bigger, but it's still pretty sizable considering we're only 30 million people, and half of Canadians are video game players, and the average ages are 30 up, and they're equally split between men and women. So our enticing experiences, we think, bring them there, but 90% of our revenues are actually export revenues. So we're global, it makes it interesting, and we focus on consoles, software, streaming experiences, and so on.
So I would just add that there are some differences with our industry because the theatrical window is still very important to our companies. They still make a good deal of money with the in-theater viewing, but by and far the growing market for us is also online digital sales, mostly streaming versus download at this time.
Yeah, the same with us. Like the physical market, CDs is down, digital downloads is down, and streaming is incredibly up. In fact, we released numbers today for the US, for the Latin market. The first half of 2017 for the Latin market is 44% up. 82% of that is streaming. God knows how much of that is Despacito. But that's the kind of thing we're seeing.
Yeah, so we just thought we'd give you a little idea of what the scale of the problem is. So it's been estimated that approximately 24% of internet traffic in North America, Europe, and Asia is dedicated to infringing content. There's also evidence that the ad revenues from piracy operations that have digital advertising associated with content are estimated to be an annual $111 million a year. And there's very large numbers of pirated movies and TV shows being downloaded by peer-to-peer protocols. There's the BitTorrent sites. So 380 million pirated movies and TV programs in 1 year estimated. So that was just wanted to give you a little idea that this is a huge problem for our industry.
Right, and so there was a recent study that came out in March of this year, I believe, that said, for example, for music piracy globally, they valued it at $29 billion globally. So it's a significant problem for us and for all of us. I want to give you a flavor of the changing nature of piracy. You heard us talk about how legitimate revenue has moved over dramatically to streaming. You know, our world, 70% US, 50% globally, is streaming. Those that infringe our content have also moved the same way, both in the US and globally. So this chart shows you the different forms of piracy that have come up throughout the years. You know, we used to talk about digital downloads. We used to talk about file sharing as a problem. The MP3 sites are digital download sites. Today, by and large, our biggest problem is what we call stream ripping. And do you guys want to say anything about?
Yeah, I mean, we would definitely agree. So this is some of our numbers from the motion picture side. So we're seeing now streaming piracy at 59% of the piracy. These are numbers for 2016. In 2015, I remember it was 49%. So that's a 10% growth just in the last year. And you really see that small green piece of pie is the shrinking downloading. And what I think we'll see as we go along is that the consumer's interest in ownership has really, really wavered. They are much more interested in just being able to stream and watch and listen and play when they want to. And so that impacts not only their legitimate actions and what legitimate products they buy, but also the way that they consume pirate content as well.
So hi, everyone.
So here's just a little bit more about our current threats. Would you talk about a little bit? Go ahead first.
Yeah, for the motion picture industry right now, the biggest concern is streaming sites. That's because they're often very slick and they have the same feel as Hulu or Netflix. They'll have all of the artwork and everything you would see on Netflix as you chose a program. And it's often that people don't even realize necessarily that they're not legitimate sites, and they're easy enough that your grandmother or your child can use them. So that's one of our biggest concerns. But our biggest growing concern right now is this whole area of piracy devices and the apps and add-ons that are associated with them. So these are either preloaded Cody boxes that already have that ability to access infringing content built in, or they may be Fire Sticks that have been jailbroken and have those same functions. But there's also freestanding sites where you can go and access from your tablet, your mobile phone, or your computer the same sites, and they all draw their content from illegitimate sources, and that has been growing very, very quickly, especially in the UK. And since MPA is actually global, so we were onto it early there, so we weren't as far behind in the US as we thought we might be. So that's our biggest focus on the anti-piracy front at this time.
And for us, it's number one is stream ripping, which is these services that will take an audiovisual stream, an authorized audiovisual stream, and pull the audio out of it and give you a permanent download of that audio, typically in an MP3 format. Some sites have suggested as many as 1 in 3 internet users globally engage in this type of activity. It's a little different than with the movies, because while we're trying to get our consumers over to an access model, where you can get all the music that you want whenever you want it for a low price per month, there are still people that want this offline permanent access, which is a problem for us as we try to move people over to the authorized streaming models. And then because we're moving people over to authorized streaming models, and because for example that 70% number that I mentioned to you, a big portion of that is the subscription streaming. We're starting to see unauthorized streaming as well for people that want to get radio, if you will, type services. And then on the gaming side.
Yeah, I mean, there's some similarities for sure, and there's some differences. So our hackers are smart. That's what it comes down to. They're just too damn smart. But they basically will recreate our entire ecosystems and clone them. They will replicate them on their own servers, play with their friends. Like, they're incredibly sophisticated. That's really hard to deal with. I mean, it's a challenge. Certainly, the streaming, the TPM circumvention on devices and games, still an ongoing challenge. And P2P file sharing is a challenge. CyberLocker is a challenge. They're all challenges. But the sophistication of our players is just incredible. And we had taken measures. I mean, we were early to try and use technology to protect ourselves back, using codes and authentication codes and stuff like that. But even that, just smarter, faster. So it's constantly a battle to try and keep up.
I'll just add one thing. The one thing that we're starting to see a new rise of is the role of hacking in the theft of content from our members, and then sort of ransom demands that large amounts be paid using Bitcoin. And that's something we would expect to continue to see growing. We're trying to get our arms around that.
So our thieves are your thieves?
Yeah,
Okay.
probably same ones.
Probably, yeah.
Well, we know that's true in the P2P space, at least. All right, so this is just a set of stats to give you a sense of how multi-jurisdictional and how global it is and how difficult it is to enforce online these days, or the challenges that you have to face just from the stats. I can't read this, I don't have my glasses on, but to give you a general flavor from what I recall, this is looking at a handful of sites that we at RIAA were monitoring in 2016. So it tells you like how many of the sites were behind a privacy proxy, how many were using Cloudflare to obfuscate their IP address so you don't know exactly where they're located, where they're hosting the content at issue, where their front end is. Some of the hosting that we did see, and you'll see that it's in Russia, it's in France, it's in Germany, it's in Netherlands, it's in the United States. So this is the type of environment that we're looking at when we're trying to enforce our rights online. So how do we do it? Or what do we try to do? We've got 3 key tools. The first one is criminal referrals, so I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, just to speak a little bit about criminal referrals, I mean, they are without a doubt the best deterrent power of anything you can do, and but there are limitations, especially when it comes to certain countries. You may not have a sophisticated cybercrime unit. You may have to train that unit yourself, even if they do exist. You also have a loss of control whenever you make a criminal referral, because the timing of how that moves is all then in the government's hand. But it's still one of the most important tools for us. We just have to carefully decide where to bring those actions. And what we have seen is that if you bring a case that gets enough attention, you can have a very large ripple effect. So the example that comes to mind for me is Kim.com, who is operating Mega Upload. I think everyone did criminal referrals for Mega Upload.
Yeah.
And it took many years for the government to actually launch that. But once the indictment was filed, what we saw was cyber lockers that were operating in the same way as Mega Upload. Some of them went offline voluntarily. We also saw a lot of them change their business model to get rid of the especially egregious features like paying uploaders based on how much the files were downloaded, things like that. And we also saw an impact on the companies that were providing services to cyber lockers and illegal sites, because a number of legitimate companies were named as unindicted parties in the indictment, which means they might be indicted. And that included Cogent, who is a very large US hosting provider and experienced one of its biggest stock drops of all time when they were listed in that indictment. And another actor would be PayPal, who was already starting to cooperate with rights holders at that time to try not to allow pirate websites to use PayPal, but they became much more cooperative after they were named in that, and much more interested in learning from us how to spot the bad actors. And I think you may have some other examples of criminal cases.
So, I mean, what was interesting with PayPal, for example, and all the payment processor services, is that they were already working with hard good brand providers, so that if you could show that there was a counterfeit good that was being sold online, they would say, okay, this is a counterfeit good that's being sold online. We don't want our payment processor services to be used to buy this counterfeit good. And they were viewing locker services as different because that was access, not buying the pirated good. But the case Mega Upload helped them realize, no, they're just changing the business model in terms of payment. Otherwise, it's still pirated goods. If I can go back real quick to, oops, too far. I hit the wrong button again, I apologize. If you look at this one, and the yellow line is P2P piracy, and you see that big jump down in around June, July 2016. It's the yellow one that kind of goes like that. That was a criminal indictment. That is when Kick-Ass Torrents, the operator of that, was arrested. So you can clearly see, when you look at the traffic numbers, that this makes an impact right away. These charts don't go out as far as 2011 when Mega Upload was indicted.
Yeah.
Same thing happened there. Huge decrease. Still a
Yeah.
problem, but a decrease.
Yeah, and Carnegie Mellon even did a study where they looked at what happened when Mega Upload went down, and there was an actual uptick in legitimate sales. People either signing up for Netflix, buying content through the legitimate platforms like iTunes and otherwise. So we can see a real value to the criminal referrals for that in that way.
Exactly. And so, like another one, which was this year, there was another locker service, smaller one called ShareBeast. It was seized by the government in 2015. In August, the gentleman that was operating it pled guilty. He'll be sentenced in December. But right around August, we assume it's their network of other people that are doing referral sites and locker sites. They all started shutting down at the same time as soon as he pled guilty. So that's another straight-up ripple effect, not just in sales, but also in this group that likes to engage in this type of activity. I'm going to leave it here because there's a thing I want to show with this one, but do you want to talk about civil?
Sure.
Is there other options?
So tool number 2, and I think just keep in mind that we think all of these tools have to be used. There's no silver bullet, and you certainly aren't going to litigate your way out of a problem like this. But we typically use civil litigation when we're trying to establish that a certain model of piracy, because piracy is always changing, is illegal, so that we can then use that to talk to other people who are operating similar services, and also to talk to these legitimate companies that are providing services sometimes, and to support law enforcement, because it can be helpful for law enforcement that some model has been found to be copyright infringement under civil law before they test it with criminal law. What you do litigate and how you litigate, I think, has to vary by region. So in the US, for example, we really use it for precedential value because it's expensive and it's drawn out. In Europe, we have different tools available to us. There's a copyright directive in Europe called Article 8.3, which allows for intermediaries to be ordered to take action because they're sometimes best placed to do that. So you can actually get orders to block sites, and you can actually get orders against hosting providers that they have to stop providing services to illegal sites. And so there we do much more litigation because those are streamlined proceedings. You actually aren't saying that those parties are liable. You're just saying they're well placed to act and that the site is dedicated to infringement. So we litigate more there. There's all kinds of challenges in China, which I'm sure anyone sitting here could talk about. One of the problems we've had in China is historically you have to bring a separate litigation for every single film that's on the site. So when we do group litigation for our 6-member studios, and we want them each to have had more than one piece of content that they can show is available on the site, we may have to file 30 separate complaints. They get farmed out to different judges, and they lead to different judgments. So there are challenges like that. So you really have to look at the region and decide whether civil litigation is a good path. And obviously law matters too. We've been much happier with Canada recently.
You should be.
We've done a lot in Canada.
We've been doing a lot.
Yeah, we've been busy in Canada.
Well, and we have the enabler provision now.
I know, that's why.
So we have this special law. I think, are we the only ones with that?
With that exact language, yours is broader.
Yeah,
This
yeah, it's
making available gets close.
close, which we have two now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have both. So, my background was international IP protection and enforcement, and I was specialized in the UK and Canada and in the US. So when I came at it from a career perspective, my job was to write that law. So I wrote that law under the Copyright Act, and the challenge was we were hearing all of these complaints by industry, particularly motion picture and music, saying, look, like, all these weird intermediaries and their activities are not, they're bad, they're facilitating the bad. How do we make them stop facilitating the bad? Because there's just not a very easy fit in the way the law is structured now. And so my job was to actually start to think about it. And I was the lead on the policy for that, which you probably didn't know. But I'm really proud of that provision because I remember I finished my policy work on that. It went to the drafting room, which was great. And then I got poached by Global Affairs to be a trade negotiator on IP. And it was like my first month in the job, and we got a call from the USTR congratulating us on that law, saying like, well done, that's actually really novel and it's cool, and hopefully it solves the challenges that we're seeing. And we had a successful case earlier this year with Nintendo, and they were able to secure 12.8 million in damages, which, if you can appreciate the differences in Canada and the US from a damages perspective, that's like obscene. Canadians are like, what? How'd that happen? It should never have been more than 100,000. And anyway, we're always apologetic about everything, especially lawsuit damages.
We established that
We
already.
established that already. Yeah. I'm always sorry. I'm just sorry. But in any case, but that was a serious win, and the court coupled our TPM protection measures, which we, of course, were inspired by the DMCA when we implemented them, and they equally applied the enabler provision, and the outcome was just like airtight case law that we're really proud of and is working. And we've got a nice clean precedent. TPM protections in the US, the precedents are kind of all over the map a little bit. There's some good ones, some gray ones, some less good, whatever. But we're really happy with it. So that was a big win in our industry. One of our first big lawsuits in Canada. We're pretty proud of it.
You also have Anton pillars. So I don't know if anybody in the room is familiar with that, but a number of Commonwealth or former Commonwealth countries have what's called an Anton pillar, which is it's a civil search and seizure. So you have to go to court, get the court's blessing. Then there's a lawyer that represents the court to make sure everything is executed fairly. And you go in with your lawyers, the court's lawyer, a forensic team, and sometimes a bailiff. And you actually get to walk out with telephones, computers, and be able to do an investigation without spoliation, which is really important in these types of cases because you have very sophisticated actors.
Yeah, we do. And they're just, as we kind of started with, they're increasingly sophisticated. And the courts, the equal challenge we have is helping the judges understand all of the evidence and the issues and how it works, because they're not engineers. And the more sophisticated and digital we become, the more critical it is to help them with the analogies and to make the case in a very kind of black and white way for them. But that takes a lot of skill. Like this is not something I do every day, thank goodness. But you both do, right? Like you're heavily engaged in these kind of things. And how have you found that?
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's also we have lots of outside counsel that helps us with this. So there's a lot of lawyers that are specialized in this area. I was mentioning earlier that I've been doing anti-piracy litigation since 2005 when I was at a law firm, and then I came to the MPA after that. So now I just manage the litigators, but
It's fun.
I still appear on the pleadings.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to keep us on this slide to show you the impact sometimes civil litigation can have. When we look at the stream ripper traffic, which is the largest line on these graphs, you'll notice there's a dip in September, October 2017, and in the US, there's a slight dip about a year earlier. This is because of a lawsuit that was filed against an entity called youtube-mp3.org, which was the largest stream ripper at the time. It was a coordinated litigation. We had people in the UK that were starting to invoke the pre-civil litigation procedure in the UK. We filed the lawsuit in the United States. It took over 15 months to get a service of process in Germany for that lawsuit, which is painful. But there's enough press around the filing of the lawsuit that defendant immediately stopped processing major music from a US IP address. And that's that first little dip that you see in the US that you don't necessarily see. I see a little bit, but not quite the same on the global traffic. And then just a month ago or so, YouTube MP3 shuttered down entirely as part of the stipulated judgment in that case. And we're starting to see several other stream rippers, not all of them, of course, because some people double down, but several others are also starting to change their behavior as well. So even though it's expensive and takes a long time, especially in the United States, we do see results, which is one of the tools that we use judiciously.
I do think it changes things because right now, when I was talking about earlier the piracy devices and apps, there seems to be no perception of risk on the part of people in the U.S., Whereas we've really seen a lot fewer people actually operating pirate sites out of the U.S. We're seeing tons of potential civil or criminal targets in the U.S. that are either selling the preloaded boxes or developing or designing the apps that make them function to access illegal content. So that's a new phenomenon for us. So we filed our first case recently on behalf of ACE, which is an alliance that includes not only the motion picture studios, but Netflix, Amazon, BBC, HBO, and a number of other companies around the globe. So we've got our first one running, and we'll see how that goes.
It's interesting, you know, before I worked for this industry, I worked for the largest broadcaster in Canada as well.
Yeah.
Bell, yeah.
They're our friends.
ISP broadcaster, but we were seeing, you know, DNS trends. So like the boxes that basically hide your identity, and they're sold on the basis of privacy, because then nobody can see where you're actually coming in from. Which when you're going to like, I don't know, like an abc.com, if I'm in the States, I can see stuff, and that's all been cleared. But if I'm in Canada, it's geo-blocked. And the levels of sophistication were amazing. But when you look at things from a business perspective, I mean, I've spent so long, just like both of you, in this space, particularly around protection and enforcement. People dismiss it so quickly, but it's like, well, wait a minute. If you live in a place where this is your community, this is your economy, and the more we reach toward, you know, digital innovation economy, we need to be thinking about this in a bigger way. So I think the work that has been done in this space has been pretty good.
Thank you. But we always talk about ourselves as being the canary in the coal mine,
Yeah.
or the candy that brings in the eyeballs. I mean, these pirates don't give a crap about our content. They care about you, the user, going there and what they can extract from you.
Yeah.
And getting people to acknowledge that's what's going on here. You know, our stuff is popular, and it brings in the users. That's the only reason they're using our stuff.
Yeah, the eyeballs.
You know, it started with, you know, the payment processors and bringing you straight up cash for the content.
Subscription model.
Right.
Pay per
As
view.
that dries up, you see cash for or you see advertising. So bring in the dollars. I mean, bring in the eyeballs, and we'll sell you advertising, and that's how they're making their money. As that has started to dry up, now we're seeing more identity theft, more malware, more pop-unders, much more malicious activity. On one of these Streamripper sites last week, I saw, let us do Bitcoin mining on your computer, and then we'll give you access to content. Now, if that's what they were doing, I don't know, but that's how they were trying to sell it.
So we just have a couple minutes left, so I
Okay.
don't know if you want to speak quickly about the outreach and the other issues. And
Sure. Okay, so what I just told you about is part of this notice, voluntary initiatives, and outreach. In addition to civil litigation, criminal referrals, we try to work with partners in the digital internet ecosystem to try to address this in a less cost-intensive manner. So we worked with the payment processors. You heard about that. We have worked with ad networks, ad agencies, the 4As. There's initiatives in Europe as well to try to stop the flow of ad dollars to these pirate sites.
which they always call follow the money, or if they're French, follow the money.
Exactly. So who do we send notices to? This is for RIAA, but this is true of almost every content industry. We're going to send notices to the search engines. We're going to send notices to the hosting companies, whether it's somebody like Twitter or Facebook, or people that we would consider to be more nefarious, like ForShared or Spinrilla, who we're in a litigation with right now. Spinrilla is straight up music. ForShared had ForShared music forever. And they still have music on it, but it used to be dedicated that way. Or more underlying technical providers, like GoDaddy for the registrar, or whoever the registry may be, like PIR, or the new GTLDs. Cloudflare, which is the one that hides the IP of these bad guy sites, or technical hosting providers like Webzilla or Amazon Cloud or what have you. And then we already talked about this, all the different partnerships we try to make with others in the online ecosystem to try to deal with the piracy issue.
And in Canada, we send them to ISP subscribers. So there's a slight difference. We took the theory, I don't know why, that notice takedown, it was great, but people must just need to know better. Let's just give them a chance. We'll just let them know what they're doing is bad, and they'll stop. No, it did not work. But we've been trying it out. So it's called notice instead of notice takedown, and ISP subscribers are identified through their IP address. We don't know who they are. We never will. But it's like, hey, we think you've done a bad thing. Please don't. Thank you. And there's no teeth to it. It does nothing. It's done nothing.
Right. So in the United
Yeah.
States, what's interesting
You
about
had
that?
3 strikes, right?
No, 3 strikes was Hadopi in
That's right,
France.
that's right, oh,
In the United States, we had a voluntary initiative with the
That's
5
right.
major ISPs,
CCI.
that CCI, the
Yeah.
Center for Copyright Information,
Yeah.
which had a graduated response and graduated escalation to end users. This was primarily for peer-to-peer infringement. There's 2 cases, both of them had hearings this week, actually,
Wow.
on whether or not the ISP itself was contributory liable for infringement based on its knowledge and inducement of the activities of its users. One is in the Court of Appeals, the Fourth Circuit. The other one is a district court case in Texas.
Good cases to keep an eye on.
Yes, good case to keep an eye on. This slide was just to quickly show you some of the other effects that this has. So from our perspective, we have licensed services that only get their content through their authorized licenses like Apple Music and Spotify. So Apple Music pays roughly $14 per 1,000 streams. Spotify pays like 7, 8, something like that for 1,000 streams. And remember, Spotify has a free service and a subscription service. So that's the blended rate for both of those.
I think we only have 2 minutes.
Okay,
There's only one more.
1 minute.
yeah. YouTube, it's $1 for 1,000 streams. And we call that the value gap. We think that this is because YouTube is trying to lower the price that it will pay, because it says if you don't pay us, go ahead and try to use notice and takedown and see if you can keep it off our system. We're hoping the law will change on that. And then our last slide.
This is my Canadian give to you all. Game on. So, I mean, our government has certainly been incredibly supportive. These topics are coming up in domestic legislation, but they're coming up in NAFTA, they're coming up in all the trade agreements, but they're also coming up in the context of the economic growth and digital industries. And I think this is the key. When you actually appreciate how much IP creates the currency, the value of your digital business, if you have a digital business or any digital business, it is the value. Like, without the IP, what are you worth? I mean, significantly less generally, and it's your competitive edge. And so that's the story that we've been sharing as a country. That's something the Prime Minister is very keen to support. He has an IP strategy. We've got ongoing legal review. So we really do feel, content, sexy content got it first, but everybody else is coming. And the more integrated software is in everything we do, whether it's autonomous vehicles or flight simulation, I mean, you pick your thing, we're there. Our companies are already partnering with these big manufacturers. The more important this is, because countries and companies will lose their competitive edge if it's not taken seriously.